Hey everybody, welcome back to On the Run with Beards and Dunn, and we brought a guest with us. But before we get to our guest, Beards, how is your knee doing? The last we talked, you were going in for that major surgery of getting your knee replaced.
Yes.
What happened?
So I went in 2.5 weeks ago, and they took out the cement spacer that was in there, and then they put in a new knee, but it's a hinge knee. So most of the time when they put in a regular knee replacement, it's kind of on a rotating platform, so you can go side to side. Well, there was so much damage done from the infection into the bone that my doctor, they had to cut the ligaments on each side to get to good bone. So they put in what's called a hinge knee. So basically, it's like kind of opening a door on a hinge on a door. So it'll go back and forth, but really not much side to side. So I was in a cast for 2.5 weeks. And just this past Monday, they took the cast off and they took the stitches out. And I went for my first physical therapy yesterday. Done. The most I'm going to be able to bend it is 90 degrees at the most. I'm at 30 degrees right now. I mean, and
Got a ways to go.
Oh my gosh, it's so weak and stuff. And let me tell you, I'm hurting too after yesterday's session. Because for 3 months I haven't done anything with it.
Just going to bring back the memories of training when you maybe had a little break and you had to come back, and those first few days were running after being off.
This is way worse.
But sorry to hear that.
But that's okay. I mean, I knew this was going to happen, and it's going to be a slow process. But the main thing is now I don't have to use a walker. I can put complete weight on my leg. I do use a cane right now because I'm pretty unstable. And then plus we had snow here yesterday, so that last thing I need to do is fall and break the other leg or something.
Okay. Well, Beards, it sounds like things are heading in the right direction. I'm
yes,
so happy to hear
they
that.
are. Yeah, they are.
Your spirit's as good as ever. And
wait, one last thing. And your ribs are doing good now.
Yeah. No, I'm healing up. The only thing, my ribs hurt so bad for so long, and I hit when I fell back onto my back, my left hand smacked against the road, and
that's right.
It hurt, and it swelled up, and I didn't think any of it. I thought, I just got a bad bruise. Well, it's been about 8-9 weeks now. My wrist hurts if I bend it just a certain direction. So I went to a acute care orthopedic.
Oh, good.
And the guy, I think he called it a TFCC tear. And I don't know what TFCC. It's a ligament that holds your wrist basically to your arm. On the outside. It's kind of right above that that bone that pokes out on the side of your wrist.
Yeah.
So right above that, there's a ligament. He goes, I think you tore that. He goes, he put me in a brace, and he said, we're going to try this for 4 more weeks because then you'll be 12 weeks out. He goes, if that hasn't improved, and I got to be honest with you, it really hasn't.
Yeah.
The brace feels great because I can't move it the way it makes it hurt.
Right.
But if I take the brace off, I can make it hurt. He goes, well, if that doesn't work, we'll try an injection. And, I'm not opposed to a little cortisone or something like that to see if it'll help it heal or mask the pain or whatever. But he goes, it may take a hand specialist. He goes, there is a procedure. They might have to go in there and kind of fix it up, but we'll cross that bridge. I tell you, after what I went through, if my little wrist injury is the worst thing I come out with, it's a blessing.
Piece of cake.
It's piece of cake. All right. Now we want to get to our guest because this is another one of those. I'm gonna do my little intro, and I'm gonna let Dick do it. Is Benji Durden. And I don't know Benji. He's not. I told him I don't think we've ever met. I know we haven't met, but we were at the starting line together at the 1983 Boston Marathon, and he was probably in the front row of the corral. I was in the back of the corral, and I didn't see Benji from the time the gun went off, and he was long done and finished and showered probably when I got done. But no, we both got our personal records that day, so we do share that common, I guess, connection. But Benji's one of those guys that I followed his career, closely. He's a little older than you and I, Dick, so he was kind of coming into his prime years right about the same time you were. And, the thing I really remember about Benji is the 1980 Olympic trials, and we'll talk about that as he qualified for the 1980 Olympic. He's an Olympian. And of course, that team didn't get to go to Moscow because we boycotted, but the dude then in 83 he came back and made the world championship team. And so, just a stellar career. If you're not already in the Hall of Fame, Benji, I'd be amazed. And if you're not yet, you will be. And so that's my little introduction because I really don't know much more about Benji than what I've read about him in the the running magazine. So, Dick, what do you know about him?
Well done. So Benji and I go way back, and Benji, thanks for being on our podcast today. And I was just telling Dunn. So yesterday, which doesn't really matter because we're not sure when this will come out, but yesterday I was on your podcast with you, Ron Tabb, and Bill Rogers, and give that a little pumping. How do people get if they want to listen to that, Benji?
Well, you can go to a YouTube channel, Marathon Champions 26.2, and I put things there. We also put it on Spotify, and I post it on Facebook as well. We've been doing this for about a year, and it's interesting. It's mostly talking to people from our generation that talk about the good old days. In fact, I can't think of anybody that young that we've talked to so far. But go ahead, bro.
Well, I had a lot of fun with you guys yesterday, and I after we got done, Bill asked me to tell that one little story, and so I logged out, but I could hear you guys laughing in the background.
Yeah, it was a funny story.
So Benji, okay, you're such an icon in this sport, and again, we're 40 years plus past our primes and everything, and so it's nice being able to do a podcast like this and kind of remember the old, back in those days when it was a lot different than it is now. But so give us a little background, Benji. First off, where did you grow up? Were you a high school superstar and things? Where did you go to college? Things like that.
Well, I was an Air Force brat, so I grew up in a lot of places. I started running in California, North Highlands, California, in junior high. I started off as a pole vaulter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this is back in the day of sawdust landing pits for pole vaulting.
Right.
And bamboo and steel poles. And a kid's dad bought him a fiberglass pole. They were just becoming available, and they were very brittle. And he comes running down the straightaway and plants the pole snaps, and he goes flying in the air and comes down and breaks an arm and a collarbone. And I walked up to my coach and I said, "Coach, I want to go to the track." And so I became a runner.
Smart choice.
Yeah, and I wasn't that much of a runner at the time. I think I broke 2 minutes for the 600. We had a 600 yard, not meter, 600 yard race. And we had this long dog leg. And we started in that long dog leg and then did one lap of the track. And that was when we did the 600. But I was okay. The next year I ran the mile, ran 5 flat. And
wow.
And that was pretty good for a 9th grader, except it was in California. Except it was in California.
Right.
We had an 8th grader run 4:28. So so I was running and I was playing in the band, and I figured we moved that year down to South Georgia where my father was from. He retired from the Air Force. And I figured, well, I'll probably have to just quit running because I'm not that good, and I'll just focus on band. So we get to California. I get from California to Georgia, and I found out the school record was 5:04. And I said, well, I could get a letter jacket maybe.
There you go.
So I went out, pushed the kid that had run the 5:04 down to, I think it was 4:54, and I ran 4:55 or something like that year. And then the next year I ran 4:36. And the last time I checked, that was still the school record.
Dang.
Which, it shouldn't be this many years later. That was like 1968. The school record was 4:36. And I went off to the University of Georgia. And again, thought I was done with running. And a kid up there convinced me to go out for cross country. And I did, and I made the team. And it was not so much that was that good; it was the team was not that good.
It sounds like my path almost exactly.
Yeah, and I ran okay my freshman year in college. I got a 4:15 mile, and I did pretty good at cross country, and but that was it. I continued running, but I never ran any faster while I was at Georgia, and I actually got slower at times. I never broke, I think 2 miles. I never broke 5-minute pace at 2 miles, and definitely did break 5-minute pace at 3 miles. Did way, 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 way too many intervals. We did intervals 5 to 6 days a week, and it wasn't.
But that was the thing. That was the
Oh
thing
yeah,
back then, wasn't it?
oh yeah, yeah, it was because some good coaches, European coaches, were doing that, but what they did was different from what the American coaches thought they were doing. They were running intervals, but the intervals were all kinds of paces, anywhere from even 8-minute pace down to 4-minute pace, and it was more the coach could watch them running. So they'd run like a mile at a very slow pace, and he'd tell them, okay, now he had these different words, fresh and whatever, but our coaches, American coaches in general, thought, oh, let's go out and run 400s. And I ran so many 400s. I hate 400s. And then and then I got into grad school, and I kept running because I kind of liked running, but I wasn't running that well. I was running okay for some local stuff, but I won a race in high school in my senior year. Won several actually. I didn't do well at the state meet because I didn't get to go because I aggravated.
Me neither.
I did get to go my junior year, and I placed 6th, I think, or something like that.
Oh,
but which was okay. I mean, but my senior year, I was running better, and I should have been able to place higher, but I aggravated some tendons. But anyway, that was the last year that I won a race until 1975. I actually I won a local pie race that was an intramural race, basically, that I was allowed to win, more or less, and because I was the only non basic frat guy that ran it. That's why I was allowed to win.
Yeah.
They didn't set it up for me to win, but it was basically a bunch of frat guys and me, and I could run. It was like a 2.5 mile run. I could run just over 5-minute pace for that, and they were running more like 6. But
and Benji, go ahead.
Anyway, the guy who convinced me to go out for cross country was a Lydiard fan, and around 74, somewhere in there, he said, you're just, actually it was 73. He said, you need to train differently. I mean, I know you ran under our coach, but you need to train differently. And I started doing some volume, and mostly volume. And I started doing a little bit of speed every now and then, but mostly volume. And then in 1975, I ran a mile, I don't know what to say, 5-mile race, and ran 24:59, and that was my first sub 5. My first sub 5 beyond the mile, as well as the first win really since '69, and that's when I started becoming a road racer.
Can I interrupt? Correct me if I'm wrong. You're born in 1951, and you're talking. So you're about 24 years old then.
Yeah, yeah.
What's amazing to me is so many people think unless you're, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, like Dick always, people thought he was born with running shoes on, when he came out of the womb, basically. But
no, he had a rod reel.
Right, exactly.
That's exactly right. But, what I'm just kind of making me feel good about this is, here's a guy that's out of college, loving the sport of running, and still, but, found a new training avenue, a more appropriate avenue. And, you're at age 24, and now you're kind of starting to come into your own. As now you may have come into your own earlier than that if you hadn't been training differently. But I think a lot of people at age 24, they're like, well, if I can't run 5 miles at 5-minute miles, there's no future in this for me as far as, being competitive. And you kind of blow that theory out of the water.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Benji, when did you run your first
marathon?
Well, I was going to say, when did you decide, I'm going to give this marathon a try?
Well, for the 76 trials, early in 74, I began to figure out, okay, I'd like to run the trials. And I was thinking, okay, I'll try the 5,000 or the 10,000. And I started looking at the standards. And I realized I didn't have it. I wasn't anywhere close. There was a book back then of tables of running. It's sort of like the books or the programs we have now where you plug in a time and a distance, and it tells you what you can do something else. Well, the Purdy Gardner tables, I looked it up, and I was way off points-wise of what I needed to qualify for the 5 or 10. but I was a little short, not a lot short, but a little short for the marathon. So I figured, okay, I'll start training for that. So in 75, I decided I'd run the Atlanta Marathon. Well, I didn't think about where I was running it, and it was a brutal course.
Yeah, you need to be part Billy Goat.
Yeah, and actually, I ran it the first time in '74 and dropped out halfway. It was a 2-lap course, and I got around the course, and I said, this is nuts. This is insane. It's not something that rational people do. And the funny thing is, uh, Tim Singleton, who was influential in the club, uh, club president, sometimes Iron Track Club president, as well as important in the beginnings of Peachtree, he stopped, lit up, had a cigarette, then went out and ran the course again, did 2 laps. That was the world we lived in back then. So
Right.
so I that first and I then I said, okay, I've really got to try this again. I mean, I want to qualify for the trials. So I ran it the next year, and I did finish it. It was a 2:36, and I I I the other part of the story is Nike had come out with the Waffle Racer, which was on a
Yeah.
sprinter's last. It wasn't a distance runner's shoe. You could use it for cross country, and that's what I ordered it for. And you had to order shoes back then because you didn't have running shoe stores.
No.
And I'd ordered it in August, and I got it in late November. And I decided,
Oh
well,
my.
I'm gonna wear this for the marathon. About think about 30K, I decided my feet are just not going to take this anymore. I had pulled off the shoes.
Rough stuff.
In Atlanta, it was 30 degrees, which pretty cold for Atlanta.
Yeah.
So I'm running barefoot down the road,
Oh my gosh.
trying to finish the race. And one of my buddies had dropped out halfway, and he decided he was going to go around and see where I was, see how I was doing. And fortunately for me, he had a shoe that was a half size larger, and also a rational shoe to run the marathon in. Because my foot now is, both feet are kind of swollen from this stupidity. So I put on his shoes, and I finished in 2:36. Then I went down to the Florida Relays and had the opposite problem. It was really, really hot. I went out too fast. The qualifying standard was like 2:23, I think it was.
Okay.
And I went out too fast, and I ran a 2:37. And then I was kind of out of time. And so I didn't qualify for the 76 trials.
So did that get you down in the dumps at all a little bit?
Oh yeah. I was kind of,
Yeah.
and I was doing well in shorter road races. That's late 75, 5 mile. I'd won that. I was doing pretty well in the local road races. I was now, I consider myself a local star.
Yeah.
I wasn't nationally qualified or quality at any point, but I was a national, local star. I could
Yeah.
win a lot, and I was running a lot of little local road races. And we had races every weekend, sometimes 3 or 4. And I I don't know why, but I started. I mean, I kept training and kept training, and I started getting fitter and fitter. And in the end of after trials are over and the games are over, um, we decided we were going to do a 24-hour relay to raise money and Gail Barron to the Women's World Marathon
Oh,
Championship.
sure.
And so we had a team of pretty good guys. There was 9 of us. We thought about getting 10 men to go for the world record for the 10-man out 24-hour relay. And the standard was way too solid. I mean, they were down in the 440s, I think, for the 20 average for the 24 hours. And we got 9 men, and Galloway was on the team. Jeff Galloway, who was an Olympian.
Yeah.
And Scott Eden, who was a All-American at 2 mile. A guy named Randy Stroud. And all 3 of those guys ended up not finishing. Randy had the concept in his head that drinking was going to be a problem. So he had not been drinking for like 6 hours. And, run a mile hard, not drink. Run a mile hard, not drink.
Right.
And he began to have issues, so he was out. Then Scott began to have tendon issues, and his Achilles tendon started bothering him. So we went and talked to the people who were, the record keepers, and they said, okay, he can run the opposite direction. We thought maybe that would be easier. So he did a mile the opposite direction, and that didn't help. So he was out. Now Galloway said, well, we're not going to get the records. I'm going home. So now we're down to 6 guys. So we're getting around 25 minutes of rest in between.
I would say that makes it tough.
Yeah. And somehow we managed to set the world record. We broke
Wow.
we broke 5-minute pace by 600 and something yards. I ended up running about 37 miles, averaging, I think my average was like 4:49 for 37 miles. And that was sort of the separation between my previous racing life and my next racing life. Shortly after that, I went down to Crowley, Louisiana, which were the AAU national championships for the marathon, and took second.
Oh.
And Jeff Hollister, who was a Nike,
right,
one of the founding people, was down there. He was driving around the country with a carload of shoes. And he came up to me after the race. And the first thing he wanted to know is where I got the shoes I was wearing, because they were Nike Elites and they weren't available to buy. You had to have run the trials to have a pair of them.
Ah.
And Galloway had a pair of them that were not right size for him, so he gave them to me, and that's what I wore. And so I became a Nike athlete, and that was what I ran in until 1985, basically, when I left Nike.
Wow.
I retired as an elite athlete at that point.
Yeah.
So that's the beginnings. That's where it all came from. I ran 2:20:23, by the way, for that 16-minute PR that day.
Dang.
That 24-hour relay intrigues me because Dick and I talk about, we used to do 1-hour runs. I haven't heard of anybody doing a 1-hour run for quite a few years now. 24-hour relays were really, I don't know if Runner's World kind of set that up and got it rolling. We had some high school teams that did it. There were, high school records. And, it's pretty amazing story. And I always remember hearing people talk about a breakthrough workout. Now, I don't know if there is such a thing as a breakthrough workout or a breakthrough race. It's kind of like what happened to you, Benji, and Dick can speak for himself. It's like you were at this level, and then, they talk about the Tour de France riders. When they finish a Tour de France, it changes their physiology. It probably changes their psychology quite a bit as well as going through something like that. But all at once they find themselves, either physiologically or psychologically at another level, and that's kind of what it sounds similar to what you just described.
I think physiologically, the great race or the great workout does affect you, but I think it's the psychology really. You realize I could do that.
Right.
I did that, and I survived it, and I'm okay. And so I was not dreading the 24-hour relay, because you basically you run and you lie down and eat a little bit, drink a little bit, and get up and run. And
Dick, we should have done one of those.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just, and there were some really good runners doing what we were doing. And we got kind of froggy at first. We were running well too fast. I mean, I was in the 4:20s for a couple of my miles, and because we were racing each other, even though
right,
it was not a smart thing to do. And then some of the guys were saying, "Well, I'm going to run an easy mile. I'm going to do like 5:10 or something." And when they did that, suddenly they couldn't get back down to below 5. And I looked at that and I said, "I'm not doing that." And I kept not pushing, but kept trying to get under 5. And you would go, I knew if I could get around the first turn and not cramp up, I was going to be okay. But it was a very emotional thing when we finished. I mean, because we were exhausted, and
I bet,
some of us are crying. The guy who ran the last 636, I think it was 636 meters or yards, whether, he had bit his lip trying to keep himself going, because that was what got us under the 5-minute pace. And I'd run the last full mile, and I got down. I can look it up, but it was a pretty good pace. And it was a very emotional, transitional thing. And we did have those kinds of, I'd have a workout every now and then that says, okay, you're in really good shape, or a race that surprised me. And, those kinds of things, we didn't have coaches that would tell us, okay, you're now wonderful.
Right.
You're going to walk on water for the next, 6 months.
That brings me up to the next question. You were self-coached?
Off and on. I mean, the beginnings of my quote road racing life, Bill Aylwine, the guy who convinced me to run cross country and then convinced me to try Ledyard, he helped me initially, and then I was on my own. And then later, Mike Caldwell coached me. He was working with me in '83 before I ran my PR. But most of the time I was, self-coached, and I learned to pay attention to what happened. If I started having, good results, that was good things to keep doing. If I had bad results, don't do that again.
Well, and Benji, you were one that I can remember, reading about some of the training you did. Like, now, is it true that sometimes in the summertime you'd wear like a rubber suit in Atlanta to get used to the heat?
Well, I only had the rubber suit for a little while. Nike sent me one of those as sort of a joke. But that started, I ran Boston in '77 and did not run it as well as I'd hoped. It was a warm day. And I was a couple minutes slower than I expected to run. And so I was thinking, okay, I've got to probably avoid heat races. Even though I was coming from Atlanta, I just didn't have a good day. And then I got invited to run the San Juan 450, which was a traditional run honoring, 450 years roughly of Puerto Rico. And I knew that was going to be a hot race. And I wanted to run well there. And I remembered reading about Ron Dawes. And there was somebody had shown me an article in Playboy about Ron Dawes. There's a man inside that sweatsuit. So I started, back then in Atlanta, everybody was running in just shorts, no t-shirt, nothing. So I started wearing a t-shirt when I was running with my friends. And then I got a long sleeve t-shirt. I don't know where I got a long sleeve t-shirt because they weren't common, but I got a long sleeve t-shirt and started wearing that. And then I put on a sweatshirt. And then I found sweatpants. This is back when a sweatshirt was, Russell cotton, kind of a heavy.
Right.
And the sweatpants, the same thing. And I went down and I won the race in Puerto Rico. And that was, my first quote. Even Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. It's still international.
Oh, it's like international. You bet.
Yeah. I got a AAU singlet, which I couldn't wear in the race because it was so tight. But I got a singlet, and that was, that was, prestige back then.
You bet.
And then I came home and quit wearing the sweats, and suddenly I was slowing down the races I was running. So I got to thinking about it, and Dr. Dave Martin would come out and run with me on Sundays. He was a 240 marathoner, and we were talking about it. He said, well, basically wearing the sweats, it's kind of like going to altitude. So I put the sweats back on. And then I said, well, maybe a little bit more. I'll put on a rain suit on top of the sweats.
Oh my goodness. In Atlanta.
Then I put on another set of sweats and another rain suit. The most I ever did was 3 sets of sweats and 3 rain suits.
Oh my gosh.
And I did.
Did you ever weigh yourself?
I actually did, weigh myself before and after. And I lost about 15 pounds one time, which was way too much.
Wow.
But
That's amazing.
Also we didn't have water bottles that made sense to carry. I'd have gas stations that I could get by and grab a drink and go on. But yeah, and the other thing is some of my long runs. I remember one session. I think it might have been going into the trials. Every time I did a long run, it rained, and the courses I ran for my long runs. It was like Thursday were my long run days, and every Thursday it rained, and I ran this loop that had a lot of dirt on it, and the dirt was Georgia red clay. So I'd finish the run soaked with about 30 pounds of sweats and dirt on my shoes. So it was a strength run.
You're ahead of your time, Benji, because I just saw a YouTube video about pro cycling, and these pro cyclists are taking it to this marginal gains, they call it, where they're looking for every little advantage and illegal advantage. Obviously we know the long history of performance enhancing drugs, but they just came up with what you were doing. They're putting their cyclists in these environmental chambers with heat.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
finding that their blood volume, their hematocrit, their hemoglobin, their body has to compensate for this stress that they're
Yep.
putting them under. And so when they get back to normal conditions, they're at a higher level, just like you said, like they have gone to altitude, which a lot of people can't afford that or have a
Right.
lifestyle that allows them to just travel around the world. And so Ron Dawes was doing it, I guess, back in the 60s. You're doing it now in the 70s.
Well,
You
and
know,
and then so Benji, that was something that I never did anything like that, even up here in northern Minnesota. But then something else that Benji did, and I never did, and not a lot of runners did it. So Benji, so like the week before a marathon, tell us about, you would do a depletion diet, correct?
Well, yeah.
Tell us what that is, because nobody even thinks about that anymore.
Well, they came out with this idea called carbo loading,
Yeah,
and and it's since been a little bit debunked. But you do a long run on Sunday, 2 hours basically was the standard you do, and then you would go on a very low carbohydrate diet for like 3 days, and then you would turn it around and go on really high carbo, and it was to trick the body into really storing more carbohydrates. Well, I
yeah,
didn't do well on the depletion part, so I the last time I think I did that depletion part was 78, and I was miserable, and I didn't feel like I
right.
gained from it. I did run a decent marathon after that, but it wasn't worth it. But later in 78, I ran the Honolulu Marathon, and we ran the Nike OTC Marathon in September, and then as a reward, they sent us to the Honolulu Marathon. But it was also, you got a nice
Yes.
trip out of it. But anyway, I ran the Honolulu Marathon, and since it wasn't an important marathon, I wasn't focused on it that much. I went out, and Wednesday before the marathon, I ran, about 10 miles to go over and see the beach and just kind of have it was a slow, easy run. Ran about
Right.
an hour and 40 minutes, and I got second in the Honolulu Marathon. So I got to thinking, okay, that wasn't what you're supposed to do, but it worked.
No.
But it worked. So then I got to thinking about it, and I talked to Dr. Dave again. He said, yeah, you depleted yourself on Wednesday. And that's the same thing as going through the diet. So then my pattern was 2 hours on Sunday, easy day with a little bit of pickups on Monday and Tuesday, easy hour and a half on Wednesday, and then, 30 minutes or so until the races, until
Yeah.
marathon. And that was my pattern. And I still do that.
I'll be
I haven't run a
darned.
marathon in a while, but I still do that.
before we get out of time, because we could sit here and this could go on for hours. I know we could. Let's get to 1980 because I'm looking at
Yeah.
your history here, and I see quite a run here. I'm going to go from 1978 Boston. You finished 11th in 2:15. You go to the Nike in Eugene and run a 2:13, get sixth place. We'll skip Honolulu. I don't remember that one. New York, you get fifth, run another 2:13. This is in 1979.
79. Yep.
Yes. Yep.
The two
So then you go
213s
back
were
to
79.
yeah. Yep. Then 2:17 at Boston got you sixth. And so now you're going into the Olympic trials, and you're a 2:13 marathoner, basically, and you're coming off a 2:17 Boston. So yeah, did anybody have you on their pick for the podium type of thing? And Dick was there in 1980. Nobody knew who Dick Beardsley was at that point. And
No.
I just remember Dick saying everybody was covering their legs because everybody was like checking each other out. Like if you look super, super fit, chiseled, like just emaciated, people were like, oh, look out for
Yeah.
that guy. But Benji, going into that, what was your mindset?
Well, one, we already knew that the boycott was going to happen. So we were running for
Right.
pride, running to, basically it was a national championship. We were running to do as well as we could.
Yeah.
The Boston was a really hot day, and I didn't run as well as I should have on the heat days. And it might have made a difference if I'd run really fast. My Boston might have taken something out of me. But I had run basically about 18 weeks in a row where I'd run a race. And so I had a lot of racing in my legs. But back then we raced a lot as part of our
Yes.
training. So I knew I was in good shape. I knew I was ready to run. but I also knew that the 213s I'd run in the previous fall were not run very well strategically. I'd gone out too hard and fallen back. I knew I was fitter than 213, but it's because I tried to run 29, 210. Not so
Yeah.
much thinking I was running that pace. It wasn't what I was trying to run. I wasn't thinking, okay, I'm gonna run 209. I was running with people that were running that pace. I wasn't ready for it. And so when the gun went off, I was thinking, okay, I can maybe make the top 10. My number was 13, so I was sort of seated in that range. And I was last at the mile because I was determined this time I'm not going to go hard. I'm going to run more controlled. I was last at the mile at 5-minute pace. And there were over 200 people in the race. And that tells you how crazy that first mile was. And over the next 4 miles, I moved back up and got the edge of the top 10 and stayed there until later in the race.
And then did you make a move, or did somebody else make a move to kind of break up the top 3?
Yeah, I looked around 16 miles and started, over the next 2 miles thinking about, okay, who's still here? Who's going to be the people to try to beat. And my 10K PR was the slowest that I could remember in that top 10. So I'm thinking,
what was it? Do you know what it was at about that time, Benji?
Well,
what was your 10K PR?
My 10K PR at that time was just under 30 minutes. I had like a 29:50 something, I think, if I remember right. Okay. And again, it was a road race PR. So, we don't know how accurate they were. Some of them are getting certified finally back then, but we don't know how accurate the courses were. And we weren't running for time. We were running just to run and try to beat each other.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I could have if I had focused on the 10K run. But anyway, and I decided at around 30K, I got to go. And I took off, and only Tony Sandoval caught me. It took him a couple miles to catch me, and I hung on to him for a little while. But then he there was nobody. They talk about, well, what would have happened if there hadn't been a boycott? That Billy would have been better shape, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody's going to beat Tony that day. That day, Tony was on. Everything was clicking.
When did Kyle Hefner come into the picture then, Benji?
When Tony came after me, Kyle came after me too, but Kyle didn't catch me.
Okay.
And that was another story. I mean, Kyle and I both had big PRs. We both PR'd by about 3 minutes. I was 3 minutes, 7 seconds, I think it was, and Kyle was similar. And he was even more of an unknown than I was. I wasn't an unknown. I'd already done well, but Kyle was. Nobody really knew about Kyle. He'd been training in Colorado, and he was just a total unknown.
I can only imagine that finish of the Olympic trials. You cross the finish line. You run at 2:10. You finish second in the nation. Any feelings that come to mind?
Well, it started before I finished. I was running right at the edge. I mean, I didn't have much left in me when I finished. We came down and we turned to the left, and then we had about a half mile to a kilometer, something like that. And then about 300 or 400 meters from the finish, we turned to the right and had this, long straightaway. Somewhere between the left turn and the right turn, I heard somebody coming up on me. It was a real heavy breeze, and I'm thinking, oh crap, I'm going to get caught. And I made the turn to the right, and I kind of looked over my shoulder because I wanted to see who it was, and I couldn't see anyone. And that's when I realized that was me. I was the heavy breathing.
That's a good story.
So running down the hill, I'm tunnel vision. I'm going to get second. I'm going to get second, maybe, because I'll fall down and I won't get anything. And then I finished, and it was sort of I made the team, and yet I'm not going to go anywhere.
I know, but Benji, so you finished second. You make the Olympic team. Now, obviously, none of our athletes got to go in the Olympics that year. But did you did you still get like a ring or a USA uniform or anything like that
Oh yeah,
as a
we got
memento, at least that you?
the full uniform and all all the big,
Okay.
and we ended up going to DC for a celebration. I shook Jimmy Carter and
Okay.
Rosalind Carter's hand. I we actually this is funny. They had a party at the Kennedy Center for the Olympians and their invited guests, and it was basically a variety show, and the MC was Leonard Nimoy. And for
Oh
whatever
wow.
reason,
Spock.
yeah, yeah, Spock. For whatever reason, he decided to invite the three marathoners up on the stage. So
Oh my.
I shook Spock's hand.
Live long and prosper.
Yep. And so we got up,
That is
and
awesome.
the Lennon sisters, who were entertainers on Lawrence Welk, did their non-Lawrence Welk entertainment, and they serenaded us while we were up there on the stage.
All right, two more races I'd like to bring up before we run out of time. Houston, 1982. Now, I bring it up because somebody in the podcast was there beside you. I ran Houston with Dick in 1981, and I had a PR that day, and Dick had a PR in 81, and Bill Rogers. I still laugh, Dick, because you came out of the woodwork, and people were coming up to Dick. He finished second behind Bill by about less than 30 seconds, I think it was. And Dick kind of had Bill on the ropes, and then Bill kind of had Dick on the ropes, and it really was a great race. And people were coming up to Dick afterwards and going, "Beards, if you could have just knocked off Bill, because Bill was the man, and if you beat the man,
yep,
you're on the next. You're at the top of the heap there, buddy." And Dick was just giddy, and he's, "Yeah, I know," and you could see Dick's fire. So a year later, they bring Dick and Bill back, thinking, well, these guys had a great race last year. They're probably going to do even better this year. But the guy named Benji Durden showed up. And what was your mindset going into that race?
Well, we had started the year before at Cascade, the Association of Road Racing Athletes circuit, and we started taking prize money.
Right. Exactly.
I'd won the Nike OTC as the first marathon on the circuit. I mean, there were a lot of other road races, and I was doing well in the other road races too. But I felt like, okay, I want to do well at Houston because there's a good purse. And so I was really motivated because I'd been part of the organization to get this thing off the ground and worked at it hard over the previous 2 years. And actually the year and a half of, it wasn't quite 2 years, a year and a half. And so I was really focused. I was fit. I was psyched. Dick and I had a race against each other down in Savannah, half marathon, a couple weeks earlier.
Half marathon.
And we both ran PRs.
He beat me there too.
Yeah. We both had run PRs on a very windy day.
Yeah.
And I just knew I was ready. So we're running along. It was a 2-loop course, and we're about 8 miles, actually maybe not quite 8 miles, and Billy starts surging. And I'm thinking, this is way too early for this. This is way too early for this. So I said to Dick, we can't let him do that and not respond because he gets mental energy from it.
Right.
So we made an early pact in the race. They had a lead car with actually, I think it was a lead car and a truck. The truck had press, etc. And Gail, Billy's girlfriend. And so every 2 minutes, we did a rotation. Every 2 minutes, I'd take the lead, Dick would take the lead. I'd take the lead, Dick would take the lead. Just keeping the pace on us. And Billy kind of drifted along behind us. And at 13 miles, roughly, we turned and headed back out. And at that point, Gail yells, "You got this, Billy." And I said, "You want to bet?" I yelled back at her, "You want to bet?" And within a mile, Billy's dropped off of us. Johnny Haverstadt, I think it was Johnny Haverstadt was back there too. But anyway, it was now just Dick and I basically rotating.
Yeah.
And somewhere around 30K, it was time for Dick to do his 2 minutes, and he didn't come up.
Couldn't do it.
and so I just ran to the finish.
Yeah.
And I talked to the press truck for the rest of the race.
Because you ran like 2:11 that day, and I ran 2:12. And Benji, wasn't first place 12,000, and I think I got 8,000 for second, if I remember right.
I think it was 10,000.
Was it 10,000? Okay.
I think so. It was 20,000 at the Nike OTC, but I think it was 10,000 at Houston.
Still, though, pretty good payday.
Good money.
Back then.
I would have had another 210 if Dick had been able to come up and take his turn.
I know.
Beards, come on, buddy.
It's a story of my life.
Yeah, it's all his fault.
All right. The last one, and then we're going to be out of time, is Boston 83. You know, I was there, and Dick, and, you know, the only two runners I say that weren't there that day were Alberto and Dick. And Dick was injured, and I can't remember what Alberto's reason for not coming to the 83 Boston Marathon was.
He had run a race in Rotterdam. I think it was Rotterdam.
There you go.
Got a big payday there.
Yeah, there was it was an interesting situation. His agency was trying to convince everybody to go to this race that could beat Billy, because Billy was represented by the same group. And they wanted Billy to have a better chance of winning Boston. And I was offered a lot of money to go and run that race, but the trials for the World Championships was Boston, and I wanted to run the World Championships. So I turned down the money because I wasn't going to get anything to run Boston. Right? You know, I could get money from Nike, bonus money from Nike, but no money from the race. But anyway, that was the background story why Alberto wasn't there. And it was also
how did they go for you? Yeah.
Well, the Rotterdam
I know you and Greg
Meyer. Well, so it was a windy day, and so the early pace was a little bit wind-aided, and I was really fit. I was again really confident in myself, but I made a stupid mistake and ran a pair of shoes that had a wrinkle in the sock liner. Then I didn't realize it had a wrinkle in the sock liner, and I'd run over 50 miles in them. I'd worn them quite a bit. I was confident in those shoes, but I wasn't running a lot of downhill. And when you run downhill, the foot slides forward in the shoe. I ended up, by the time we were hitting the Newton Hills, I was developing a blood blister.
Oofta.
Yeah.
And so going up on Heartbreak, I knew I had the blood blister, but I was okay. It was bothering me a little bit, but it was okay. Greg comes up on me. I'd been leading for a long time. And at one point I had maybe as much as a 50-meter lead. And he comes up on me, and it's starting to sprinkle a little bit. And I'm saying, well, we're going to have a good time. We didn't really know how fast we were running. We just knew it was going to be a fast time. And so I come off the hill, and he kind of surges, and I try to surge too, and my blood blister pops.
Oofta.
And so I go, we're running in the 440s at that point, coming off the hill. And I go from 440s to 520s because I'm now running on hamburger and on my right foot. And so I went from probably, if I'd been able to continue on, we'd have both been under 209. But I wasn't able. And I hung on. Tab caught me probably with about 2 or 3 miles to go, and beat me by about 30 seconds.
But still ran 209 that day, Benji, on a mangled foot.
Yeah, but that was the other thing, because that foot was mangled. I ended up rotating my foot, trying not to land on that.
Right.
I strained my plantar fascia.
Yeah.
So I got the World Championships. Yep. I didn't know I'd strained my plantar fascia. I just knew I had a pain in my foot. I got the World Championships, and the pain started bugging me again. And I wasn't as fit as I should have been because I was training on a mangled foot, bum foot.
Right.
And so I didn't run that well at the World Championships. But I did have an invitation to go run the Toronto Marathon as my next marathon. And that was one where, because I was a favorite, everybody just keyed off of me. So I didn't.
Sure.
I just sat until we got about 5K to go, and I took off at 5K to go and ran him really hard, like 14.
And won it, yeah.
Yeah, I won it, like 14, 15 for the last 5K. But in the last mile, somebody stuck an ice pick in my heel. The fascia tore on off.
Oh.
And that was the end of my elite career.
Yeah. It happens quick sometimes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That was the end. I ran 2:15 and I never broke 2:18 again.
Yeah.
Well, Benji, I tell you, we're at about 50 minutes. This is what happens every episode. we get this conversation, and it's so much fun for me, and I think Dick just enjoys it too.
Oh my
Hopefully you do.
gosh, yes.
But we look at the clock and go, I can't believe 45, 50 minutes just flew by, and we've only scratched the surface.
We'll have to do it again.
We will.
Yeah.
You're a great spirit.
Yeah, we end up, we sometimes will go 2 or 3 hours for our podcast, but then
Oh my gosh.
well, yeah, but here's the thing: we don't post it all. I'll break it up. Like we did with Bob Hodge. We had 4 podcasts. I go in and I find, okay, there's a spot where there's a little bit of silence. I'll cut it there,
Right,
and then I'll put it up the next one. And so I'll spend a good bit of time separating it up into rational 25 to 35 minute short podcasts.
I'd like to see the director's cut on some of those, because there's probably some stories that you can't put out for everybody else.
Yeah, we've cut out a few things that we thought maybe weren't politically correct, and we don't put the video up either. So.
Well, thank you. I'm going to cut. I'll let Dick finish up, but I'm just going to tell you, Benji, thank you so much for doing this. And it's a, if you would have told me back in 1975, 76, when I was starting out as a runner, that someday I'd get to visit with you and with us and Ron and Bill and Frank and all these famous runners I only used to read about, I would have never believed you in a million years. But that's kind of the running community. And I think that's why Dick and I enjoy this so much. If we lived closer together, I could see us guys all getting together down at the cafe.
Right.
Or maybe at the country club. No, probably not. But, and we'd be doing what we're doing right now. And so thank the Lord we've got the internet and the computers and all this ability to chit-chat. And I hope people that listen to this get some, our goal is, education, motivation, and a little entertainment on the side. With Dick, that's a guarantee. And so thanks for doing this. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, Benji, it's a pleasure. And gosh dang it, we've been friends for a long, long time. And we can't thank you enough. We want to thank everybody for listening today. And if you have any questions for Dunn or myself about the show, you can contact us directly at our website at beardsanddunpod.com, or you can leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, or X, all at Beards and Dunn Pod.
Yeah, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see our pretty faces. And leave us a comment or subscribe. We'd love to have that. Benji, have a fantastic day. And don't hang up right away. I'm going to hang up here, but keep on, because I want to make sure all your data uploads onto our system here. But again, have a fantastic day, and thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
I've enjoyed it.